Hey there everybody, today we are going to be showcasing a deck that I've had a lot of fun personally playing with and just playtesting, theory crafting to see how we can make this work. And that deck is Craniamon. The big blocker deck has been something that I felt like has been non-existent just because with how fast the game has become. But I think really BT13 gave this deck a lot of support and a lot of pieces to really help put it just back on the radar. It is by no means tier 1, tier 0, but I still think it's a really fun deck to play, really reminiscent of the sort of old Craniamon deck with a little bit more relevance now and a little bit more tools that help keep it relevant. So without further ado, let's get into the deck profile. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what changes you guys might want to see. The deck photo is above and will be linked below in the video description. And without further ado, let's get into it. All right. So starting off with our eggs, we're going to do 4 of the BT9 Tumblemon. Inheritable during your opponent's turn. If this Digimon has blocker, you gain plus 1k DP. This is an important part of the strat as you're just really trying to make your stack as big as possible to prevent things like DP reduction, raid, whatnot, so you can keep your big stack on for as long as possible and be as annoying as possible with it. So Tumblemon gives you the ability to ensure that you have a bigger body on board for as long as possible. Going into our rookies, we are running 4 of the BT13 Gotsumon. So Gotsumon is a blocker inherently, and it's a nuanced searcher. And I say nuanced in the sense that it's not like your typical, like you play it for 3 and you search your top 3. It has to get deleted during your opponent's turn. So on deletion, if it's your opponent's turn, you get to reveal the top 3 cards of your deck, and you can add 1 black card among them to your hand. So being a blocker deck, that sort of makes sense, if you think about it, right? Like you want to put out blockers and then your cards were more likely than not look to block. So on deletion, like you're rewarded for just doing what the deck wants to do. So just keep that in mind that it's an on deletion search, not an on play search. Next, we're running 2 Tsunorizumon promos. I like this card because being a kind of control-y blocker deck, like this deck still suffers from a lack of pace, right? Like at some point, your ability to control and manage the tempo of the game will be a bit hindered, so you won't be able to do that as effectively in the late game to some of these decks. So having the ability to, say, use your stack and go into 2 checks for 13k can be helpful, and can be quite a surprise because it's like, okay, like I just need to wrap this up, like here's some aggro, here's some tempo for it. So I think Tsunoriza is pretty good for it. I still want to keep it at a 2 of because you don't want to see too much of it because your reboot is going to be more important, as you can see with the rest of our cards. But the +1 security check can come up big in some matchups. Next, we are running 4 of the BT2 Toy Agumon. This card, again, like I've alluded to, is inheritable, gives reboot. Reboot is a key thing that you want to be able to give your stack in this deck because this allows you to swing knowing that you'll have your blocker back on board next turn. Because if you don't have reboot, you're sort of not able to, right? Because if you swing, your whole idea of being a blocker is now gone. Reboot allows you to check, do some pokes, and go back to being a blocker next turn. So as you'll see with the rest of our deck, like a lot of this is themed around giving our stack blocker in as many ways, or reboot and blocker as many ways as possible. Last but not least, we are running 2 of the BT6 Toy Agumon. All turns, when this Digimon has blocker, it gains +1k DP. Again, more ways to give your stack as much DP as possible. And that is it for our level 3s. Moving on to our level 4s, we're running 4 of the BT12 Sephirothmon. It is a hybrid, which black as a meta or as an archetype was sort of lacking. Not a lot of hybrids for it to choose from. This is another hybrid that now black is able to utilize in the pool. You may Digivolve on top of a Tamer as if it were a level 3, as most of your hybrids will do. When Digivolving, you get to pick one of your opponent's Digimon and give them, start of your main phase, this Digimon attacks. So you're basically forcing them to just swing at the beginning of the turn, which is pretty good if you have your big blocker stack in play. Of note, it is an expensive Digivolve. It is a 3 cost as opposed to a 2 cost, so keep that in mind when you're going into it. But I think I like it at 3 for that when Digivolving effect, because it can be quite annoying for your opponent. Next, we are running 3 of the BT12 Cranimon. Cranimon is, again, it has inheritable reboot for your stack. So this is another way your big stack can get reboot. It is also a cheap on-play. So if you're hurting for a rookie, you're slow to get going, you can just, go ahead and hard play a Cranimon for 4 and build off of that if it lives. So reboot and a cheap on-play. And last, for our level 4s, we're running 4 of the new BT13 Cranimon. Cranimon is jamming inherit, and then also gives reboot as an inheritable. So if you can imagine, if you want to get an early poke in play, you can go ahead swing jamming with Glady, and then go into a level 5. The stack now has reboot, and you'll reboot, meaning that they can't swing over it unless, of course, they have raid or something like that. So I think Clanimon's pretty good as well for that reboot effect and the jamming. Moving on to our level 5s, we're going to start with 4 of the BT11 Metal Tyrannomon. Really good inheritable effect. All turns, once per turn, when this Digimon were to delete something by battle, your opponent has to trash the top card of security. So being a big blocker deck, you are going to be deleting a lot of your opponent's cards by battle most of the time. So you'll be trashing their security if they choose to swing into it, right? So that's really the whole point, is that you set up your big stack. If they try to swing or try to poke, you block and they trash security and kind of wind them and grind them down that way. Its one Digivolving on-play effect is not bad either. For each green or black Tamer that you have in play, you can suspend one of your opponent's Digimon, and then they do not unsuspend during the next turn. So not a bad control aspect as well. You can swing over things if you have a big stack and whatnot. So not bad, really, but I use it for its inheritable effect. I really like the inheritable, which is why, as you can see, we're probably running 4 of the new BT13 Giromon. Giromon inherently is a blocker, but it's inheritable. Similar to Metal Tyranno, is a once per turn during your opponent's turn. If one of your Digimon, doesn't have to be this stack, but any of your Digimon on field were to suspend, your opponent has to trash the top card of security. So if you declare a block, that is the same as suspending, which will then trash your opponent's top card of security. So if you can stack multiple things up together, you can imagine you're trashing like 2 security, when you do that. So pretty good inheritable right there, particularly for this deck. Moving on to our level 6s, we are just running 1 of the old BT3 Crania. It is a blocker inherently, and then all turns, all of your Digimon with blocker aren't affected by, or can be deleted by your opponent's effect. So not bad. I really am running this just as a Craniamon target to get on board. In all honesty, ideally, I think the new Craniamon is a whole lot better. But, just because running 4 of a level 6 I felt like was just too low, which is why I just threw on this 5th level 6 as this Craniamon. I do think the other one is a lot better, but this one is not bad just to have on board. And speaking of our new Craniamon, here he is, BT13 Crania. So, again, it is in a blocker inherently. And on play or when Digivolving, until the end of your opponent's turn, this Digimon can't be affected by effects and your opponent's Digimon. The effects of your opponent's Digimon, sorry. So, again, very nice for like DP reduction, effects like deletion by effects, bottom decking, bouncing, whatnot. So pretty good card, and just having it stick on board, which is what you want to be able to do. And then at the end of your opponent's turn, you get to choose one of your opponent's Digimon and force them to swing. So, again, the basic idea is that you set up all your blockers and then you get it to a point where your opponent is like forced to swing into your big stack. They will most likely die. And when they do die, you get to trash security. And when you whittle them down to a point, you can just go ahead and just start swinging with your guys, So that's really what this deck wants to do. And I think this Craniamon is more effective at doing that than the old Craniamon. Moving on to our tamers, we are going to be running 2 of the starter deck, Tai Kamiya. When you use blocker to suspend one of your Digimon, you can suspend this tamer to restand. So effectively giving your blockers an extra block, if you want to put it that way. If I could run more of him, I would, but I think the deck was just a little tight with options, which is why we're only running 2 of him. But in terms of being a blocker deck, like that card is very, very good for what it wants to do. Lastly, to round out our tamers, we're running 3 of the BT2 Memory Setter Tai. Sets you to 3, which is helpful for just progressing your plays. And then opponent's turn, all of your black Digimon gain plus 1k DP. Going along the thought train of, let's make these big stacks as big as possible so that they're even more difficult to remove. Moving on to our options, we run 2 black memory boost. Self-explanatory in what it does. It's a 3-drop to search top 4, pick up a black Digimon. You really want to be able to find your pieces and get into your big stack as soon as possible, so boost will let you do that. If I could, I would try to run it at 3 of. I probably would maybe cut down on one of the other options that we're talking about to run 3, but so far, 2 has worked just fine for me. So I'll keep it at 2, but maybe future testing, I do see myself bumping boost up to 3. We are running 3, however, of this card over here, Waltz's End. I think a very, very good card for this deck and really gave it more relevance. So main phase, until the end of your opponent's turn, you get to choose one of your Digimon, and they gain during your opponent's turn. When this Digimon becomes suspended, delete all of your opponent's Digimon with a play cost less than or equal to that Digimon. And then also will gain during your opponent's turn, this Digimon can't be affected by option cards. So things like Chaos Degrade, Lonky, Full Meteor Impact, all those things won't affect it, can't get rid of it. And then here, if you think about this Craniamon over here, if this declares a block, meaning that it is now suspended, Waltz's End will go into effect, meaning that pretty much board wipe, right? You get to delete everything on board that's 13k or less. Not bad, right? Not bad. It is a 6 to play, which can make it a little bit expensive. But if you think about it as like you're essentially board wiping your opponent, I mean, that's really, really, really good. Next, we're running 2 Laplace's Demon. Main phase, until the end of your opponent's turn, one of your opponent's Digimon gains. Start a main phase, this Digimon attacks. So similar to the whole mantra of, look, we're going to force your guys to swing and we're going to block. And a lot of your inheritables will proc off that way, and a lot of control tempo is through that mechanic, and this is sort of the embodiment of that. So run 2 Laplace's Demon from BT12. 2 Breath of the Gods from BT3. Again, if you're thinking about what makes your big stack stick, well, Breath of the Gods will do that because one of your Digimon gains reboot, and also cannot have its DP reduced or returned to owner's hand or deck until the end of their next turn. So really just halts any sort of shenanigans where DP reduction deletes it, bouncing deletes it, putting it away. Do note that things like Lonky or Chaos Degrade will still cause your stack to go away, so this doesn't block that, but it is a pretty good blanket protection. Its security effect is also pretty darn good too, meaning that it just blocks all your opponents from attacking for the rest of the turn, so it's a pretty good kind of floodgate mechanic there. Last option we are running is 1 Final Zubagon Punch from BT4. Main phase, one of your opponents or one of your Digimon gets plus 3k DP until the end of your opponent's next turn, which is huge. And then if this Digimon has 16k or more, this Digimon will gain Blocker, will gain Reboot, and will gain Security Check +1. Pretty good sneaky tech piece for some late aggression, right? If you can imagine your promo Sunariza, if that is in your Crania stack, and you're able to swing 2 checks with it, but now you add on Final Zubagon Punch, you're swinging in 16k, potentially 3 checks with Crania, and then against Reboot, and it will be a 16k blocker, which will be forcing your opponent to block, or to swing, you can block and delete again. So I think it's just very good for some late game aggro, and on top of the fact that it gives additional DP and Reboot as well. So I think all in all, a pretty good card. So that is the deck. I do think, like I said, this deck is pretty fun. It's a little bit slow, I will say, in terms of what cons there are for this deck. It does take some setup, but once you are able to set up, I mean, your blockers are going to be real sticky. They're going to stay on board. They're going to be forcing your opponent to just keep swinging, and really control the tempo with that way. And with how prevalent DP reduction is, I mean, this deck does block it. So I think it's fun. I think it's a good locals deck to go in and just have fun with. The deck photo will be, as I said before, in the video description down below. Let me know what you guys think. I'll be definitely playtesting more with this deck to see what else I can do. If you guys have any suggestions, please do let me know. And we will see you on the next one. Bye.